residing in Wall Township for the past 15 years. On a full-time basis, Lauren works for healthcare finance, and on a part-time basis, Lauren proudly serves as a policy consultant for the Garden State Equality, New Jersey's largest LGBTQ rights organization. In this capacity, Lauren has assisted in the passage of several landmark bills, such as marriage equality codification and the outlawing of the gay panic defense. Lauren is also the chair of 2 political organizations, one statewide and one local. She enjoys music, reading, travel, and spending time with her family and her dog, Shelby. Following her presentation, Lauren will entertain questions and answers if time allows. This presentation will be recorded and made available on the church's YouTube and Facebook sites for those who could not be here today. We thank all of you for coming out today. That was no pun intended, by the way. And please enjoy the presentation. It is our pleasure to present to you today Lauren Albrecht, Standing Up Together for Equality.
All right, can we hear me? We good? All right. This is a first for me wearing the microphone, so bear with me, and if it's annoying, just tell me. And maybe, should we turn that guy off so there's less reverb, maybe? So, thank you guys for having me. I'm Lauren Albrecht. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I proudly identify as a bisexual cisgender woman. And thank you to Jackie and Brenda for reaching out and asking us to represent Garden State Equality today. We're going to run through some things. I talk pretty quickly, so if anybody would like me to slow down, if anybody has a question or a point to make, please at any point in time raise your hand, interrupt me, yell at me, whatever you want to do. I'm pretty flexible, and I would like to have a discussion format. I'm not always comfortable just talking at people, so if we need to engage in any clarification of any points or any definitions of anything, we can do that at any point in time. So, let's see. We're going to talk about today. We're going to cover a lot of topics in a pretty short period of time, so please let me know if anything needs a deeper dive. So, what we're going to talk about today is the history and context of anti-LGBTQ legislation in America and where we're at right now, right? And so I think we've all obviously seen that this is a hot button topic in the national news, in the local news, on your local school boards, on your local Facebook township group message boards. And so I'm really thrilled that you guys are making the intentional choice to include this in your discussion. It's a really important topic and a really great way to be a part of progress. I will tell you that this is a first for me, giving a discussion of this sort in a church. Go on.
Yeah, my apologies for early. Two things. The mic's reverbing.
This is off.
Yeah, something's reverbing if you can hear the ring. And just, if you wouldn't mind, just a little slower.
Sure.
I appreciate you doing that.
Sure, of course. What can we do about the microphone?
And maybe the 2 mics when you're close to the mic.
It's off.
You turn it off.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this is not just about that.
All right, should we try that again? Or maybe that's not the best place for it. Like I said, I am new to this microphone on my clothing. Is that better? All right. So, I will tell you that it is a first for me to have a discussion like this in a church, especially in a church sanctuary, so I thank you for providing me with this learning opportunity, which I am always trying to learn more and do more in the community. And I also just want to recognize that church in the community sense or in the physical sense is not always been the most welcoming and inclusive place to certain LGBTQ people growing up, right? So I am just glad to be here among you and to see that this heals a lot of trauma for people to find an inclusive and welcoming church space, because it is the source of much alienation for a lot of the LGBTQ community. Familial alienation and faith-based alienation are two of the biggest reasons that our LGBTQ youth wind up homeless, wind up using drugs, turning to sex trade or sex trafficking. So it's really wonderful and sort of a huge step in the right direction. I will tell you that growing up in the Catholic Church, and I haven't, been a member of a church in 25 years, but I could never have conceived of discussing things like this in a sanctuary with a group of like-minded people. So I appreciate the opportunity.
There are a lot more of us than you might be aware of.
Yeah, I'm learning. And, and I think that is a symptom of the time and the progress, right? And when I see it, it's just a wonderful, lovely thing. It really heals my heart a little bit. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of legislative process for anybody who is not real familiar with this or doesn't remember their 7th grade civics lessons, because it is a lot, but we can do a pretty quick run through. So if we could go up one slide. There we go. And I don't know if you could see that, if we can pinch out or anything like that. Maybe, yeah. And when we go to the history and context, that's going to be really small type. And so you guys will be able to access this program when we're done, and you can read it, you can pinch out on it. It's a lot of information in a really small space. So the legislative process in a place like New Jersey that has a bicameral, which means two-house legislature, we have the Senate and we have the Assembly, right? And for a bill to become law, this is the procedure that it follows. And this is important for us to know, because when we talk about what legislation is happening right now in New Jersey, we can pinpoint these different points to talk about how we can act on them and how we can influence them. So the bill needs to be introduced into both houses. Bill introduced in the Assembly, bill introduced in the Senate. They're each assigned a separate bill number. A is an Assembly bill, S is a Senate bill. And then they move through the process in both houses on a parallel track, right? So the bill is assigned to a committee based on the subject matter that it addresses, right? Whether it's education, law, public safety, consumer or commercial things, property, taxes. So it's assigned to a committee depending on what the subject of the bill is. It gets heard in committee in both houses, in the Assembly and the Senate. It gets voted on in the Assembly. And this is a very truncated sort of diagram here. It's got 2 readings and then it gets voted on. So at any point in time at these committees, it can be amended, right? It can be amended formally by the sponsors of the bill, or it can be amended on the floor. That's also important, because sometimes when we're working on really critical LGBTQ legislation and things are moving very quickly in both houses, it's important for us to get an amendment in on the floor so that it can get voted on in the same day and passed or vetoed or voted no. So once the bill has been voted on in committee, and if it passes both, we call that passing committee. If it passes committee, then it goes to a full vote in both houses, a full Assembly vote and a full Senate vote. And once it passes both of those, and it can also be amended on the floor of those votes as well. The bills merge together into one bill, and it's the Senate bill number that carries forward. The Senate is sort of the house that, not more important, but it's the one that takes precedence. So the Senate bill number is the one that carries forward, and then it goes to the governor. The governor decides that he's either going to sign or veto the bill. And at any point in time, a bunch of different things can happen. So the bill can be introduced and go nowhere. It can stop right there. We have a democratically controlled legislature right now, and the majority usually controls what bills are heard in committee and what bills are not heard in committee. So if the chairs of the committees or the leadership of the House and the Senate decide that they are not going to hear this bill, it's dead. It stops. Once a bill is dead for 2 years, at the end of the legislative session, it drops off, it falls off, and it has to be reintroduced the next session. So right now, every seat in the New Jersey legislature is up for election, and at the end of this year will be the end of the legislative term or session. If a bill has not passed and been signed by the governor by the end of this year, well, by the middle of January, it'll be dead. It will have to be reintroduced. And so the sponsors of the bills that have not passed will have to look at all the list of their bills that have not passed, decide which ones they want to reintroduce. How do we decide, how do they decide what bills are going to be introduced? There are a number of different ways. So they have legislative staffs, they have policy staff that gives them ideas, right, based on what committee assignments they have, based on what their constituency is saying, what people are saying when they call on the phone and say, hey, I really want you to do a bill about smoking on the casino floor in Atlantic City, or windmills, or whatever the topic is at the moment. So then the legislator can decide if they want to introduce a bill on this, or if the bill has already been introduced, if they want to sign on to it as a sponsor or a supporter. So that's a bunch of different ways how we arrive at a bill. And this becomes important because we're going to talk about some of the bills where they are in the legislative process currently, and what we can do to either stop them from moving forward or move them forward, depending on if they align with where we want to go and what our values are. Here in your district, you currently have the only openly LGBTQ legislator representing you in all of legislature right now. His name is Don Guardian. He's great. I really like him. He's nice. His running mates are, or his district mates are what I would call not so great on LGBTQ issues. But Don himself, being an LGBTQ man, has a unique perspective, I think, and this is why visibility and representation are important. In the history of the New Jersey legislature, we have only had 3 openly LGBTQ legislators. That's really bad. That's not good. We've never had an openly LGBTQ representative of Congress, of Senate, or at a statewide office at the governor or in any of the... So we have some members of the executive cabinet that are LGBTQ right now. Our commissioner of the Department of the Environmental Protection Department, Sean LaTourette, is an LGBTQ man, and there are a couple levels right below that are LGBTQ people, but by and large we are suffering a lack of representation in places where decisions and laws are made. And that's harmful and detrimental to our community. In the history of the legislature, we've had 3 openly LGBTQ men. That's cisgender, white, LGBTQ gay men. 2 of them are no longer in legislature. It's never had a woman, never had a person of transgender experience serving in our legislature. That is a serious lack of representation. If LGBTQ people make up 6 to 12% of the population, and it's rough to get a handle on exactly how much of the population because it relies on self-reporting in places that are not always safe or do not feel safe for LGBTQ people to self-identify. So 6% at the low end, 12% at the high end. Out of 120 members of legislature, equal representation would be 7 LGBTQ members at any given time. And in the history of legislature, we have only had 3. So 7, 6 to 12% of the, so 6 or 7% of the population would be 7 members, 8 members. And if we were looking at making equity, if we were looking at 12% of the population, it would be much higher. And we're not there, unfortunately. And I could talk to you for hours and hours about why that is, but we have a time limit here. So, in the history and context, and I took a lot of the timeline from GLSEN because they have a really comprehensive resource on this, but I'm going to sort of add my own notes in here. LGBTQ people have existed in different forms in the historical record from all parts of the world since the beginning of recorded history. This is not new. In America, since the beginning of colonization of North America, laws in individual states and colonies have outlawed homosexuality or sodomy or cross-dressing in vague ways without explicitly enumerating, but grouping all LGBTQ identity into obscenity, such as the Mayflower Contract of 1620, which establishes gender norms. So, that's sort of the beginning. We're going to start at the beginning of people from Europe landing in North America for the sake of clarity and time, right? And how it's relevant to what's happening in our current climate. So, we're not going to start at the 2nd century. That's wild. So, like I said, when the Mayflower came over, the Mayflower Contract of 1620 established gender norms. And we're going to also talk about this in terms of where these things come from and what the genesis of them is. And I will tell you in one word, the genesis of these biases that we still see today and in the laws that are being made right now to restrict LGBTQ rights and identity, the one word is religion. it's been the unfortunate beginning of basically every law that has considered LGBTQ people to be immoral, wrong, bad, out of line, against the law. It can be traced back to Judeo-Christian belief that came over from as far away as the Mayflower. When colonizers landed in North America, the indigenous peoples had what they considered to be two-spirit, which are people of both or no gender identity. There were no laws outlawing that. There was nothing that said that those people had to live outside of the familiar group or the community. This is a thing that was put upon the people who lived here with the beginning of Puritan values. So there's some interesting stuff that we'll drop by in the history here. Let's see. The first known conviction for lesbian activity in North America in 1649, when Sarah and Mary were charged with lewd behavior in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So in 1649, that's what, how many years? 700 years ago, 800 years ago, that was the first time on record. So we have a few different things here. First, usage of the word homosexuality. First, description of what lesbian activity is. So in 1779, Thomas Jefferson revises Virginia law to make sodomy, committed by men or women, punishable by mutilation rather than death. Prior to 1779, it was punishable by death. I also want to draw the thread here that while these things are happening, it's not just that sodomy is obscenity, right? It's a bunch of other things. And as different cultures are brought into this, different religions are brought into this, the common thread is othering, right? So LGBTQ people are other. People from Mexico are other. People of different religions are other. Anti-Semitism plays largely into this too. It's all connected by a single thread, that is that anybody who is not white and Christian is other and then somehow immoral, right? And we're seeing that in the tone of the legislation that's coming up now. It's about protecting the children, right? It's about making sure the kids don't know anything other than cisgender or straight identity and sexuality. And these things, like I said, they started a very long time ago. It's not brand new.
Ben Franklin and the sodomy punished.
That was Thomas Jefferson, 1779. And this presentation will be available to you when we're done.
Okay.
Yep. It's probably better than you trying to write down everything I'm saying because I talk pretty fast. And we can see between 1779 and 1920s, 1930s, the laws that come up are vague enough to be applied to a large group of people, not just LGBTQ people, to anybody who can be considered as acting immoral. These are morality laws, right? And this is basically anybody, again, who acts outside of a cisgender or heteronormative context. This is in America, though. So in 1952, Christine Jorgensen is the first American coming forward publicly about being a transgender person. 1952. This doesn't mean that transgender people did not exist before 1952. It just meant that Christine Jorgensen was the first one who felt compelled to say it loud enough that everybody could hear it. Let's see. 1955. Nope, we're going to skip that one. All right, 1956. James Baldwin, who is one of my favorite historical figures. If you guys don't know who James Baldwin is, I could talk for an hour about that by itself, but he published his first novel, and it's called Giovanni's Room, and it was probably the first critically acclaimed, widely read book that explores bisexuality or men having relationships with men. And it was transformative and groundbreaking, but it also served to continue to other people like James Baldwin in the popular viewpoint. And it was a landmark book for LGBTQ people, but it was a banned book at that point in time. Let's see. 1962, Illinois becomes the first U.S. state to remove sodomy law from its criminal code because it had been in the criminal code of every state before that. I don't know if you guys know this, but Illinois, for being in the sort of in the Midwest, is a really progressive state and has really progressive laws. And when we talk about laws that we are making here in New Jersey, that we're passing here in New Jersey, a lot of the times we get text of the bills or ideas for the laws from Illinois bills. It's definitely one of the top 4 most progressive legislatively states in the Union. It is interesting because every time I've ever driven through it or flown over it, I never think, oh, this seems like a pretty progressive place. But it is. Let's see. So, 1963, Bayard Rustin, another really important figure who was like Martin Luther King's right-hand man. There's a center in Princeton called the Rustin Center, and it's named after him. So, Bayard Rustin he wrote much of Martin Luther King's speeches. He marched with him. He wrote the I Have a Dream speech, and he has been contextually and historically erased from the record as being a formative part of the civil rights movement because he is gay, not because he is black, not because of anything else other than the fact that he had a lifelong partner that is a man. And we're recently sort of re-unearthing the history of this and bringing his name to the forefront where it belongs and giving him the credit that he's due. 1963, the first gay rights demonstration in the U.S. takes place at Whitehall Induction Center in New York City. Obviously, if you're here, you probably know that New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and then some places in New England, not much of the South, are places that LGBTQ people have traditionally congregated and felt comfortable in and lived in. So it makes sense that 1963, in the first gay rights demonstration in the United States. Did I skip something? I feel like I skipped something pretty important here. No? There we go. Yep, there it is. 1970, 1969, Stonewall. So we've just recently come upon the anniversary of Stonewall in 2020, where all of the Pride celebrations had a Stonewall theme of 50 years. There's a lot of myth and lore surrounding what happened at the Stonewall riots, but the narrative that we're going with is that Marsha P. Johnson, Elizabeth, New Jersey native, and Sylvia Rivera, who they founded something called the Street Transvestite Action Resource. Now it's called STAR, and it was for trans women working in the sex trade. Sex trade is a whole other part of this that we can get to eventually. So they founded STAR, and it was probably like the first organization of its kind dedicated to helping transgender women working on the street seek health services, STD testing, a lot of domestic violence protection. It has legal resources, and it still exists in some form. So that 69 was Stonewall riot. 73, big deal. The Board of American Psychiatric Association removes homosexuality from its classification of mental disease or mental illness, which is a big deal. This says 1977, Harvey Milk becomes the first openly gay person to be elected to public office in California. He was not the first openly gay person to be elected to public office. I don't really know why the narrative always says that, but Kathy Kozachenko in Ann Arbor, Michigan was elected before Harvey Milk and was openly lesbian. I'm not real sure what that says about lesbian erasure, but if the narrative is that it was Harvey Milk, I don't think that's correct. Let's see. So then we can come to the 80s, right? Democrats are the first political party to add gay rights to their platform during the DNC. Big deal, especially since even now in 2023, there are a number of middle-of-the-road Democrats who are not necessarily on board, right, with complete equity and equality for the LGBTQ community. I know that that may come as a surprise, considering the national rhetoric that we see all the time, but here in New Jersey, even moderate or more conservative Democrats, I got to tell you, sometimes I have a hard time getting through. So, all right, let's see. So 1982 is the beginning of the AIDS crisis. And for anybody who is a little bit older than me, you know what that looked like in the 80s and what effects it still has, and how the political climate at the time did nothing but further the othering of LGBTQ people living with AIDS. 1987, ACT UP, Direct Action Group, which still exists in some form, and really changed the face of advocacy and how we advocate for pro-LGBTQ laws. Let's see, I'm skipping through things that are not American history here. 1998, Tammy Baldwin becomes the first openly lesbian candidate ever elected to Congress, winning Wisconsin's 2nd congressional district. 1998, that's a long time ago, and that's a big deal, compared to the fact that we, in New Jersey, again, have never had an openly LGBTQ, even candidate that I know of running for Congress. All right, let's go. So in the 2000s, a lot of what we can see is that states are loosening their definition of sodomy and removing it from statute in some places, but there is this undercurrent, right, of pushback in more conservative places, and it's quiet, and LGBTQ people have sort of been ringing the alarm on this for 20, 30 years now, like, we're kind of going to whip back the other way once we push for progress in one way. It's going to come back, and it started coming back recently very loudly in these things that are happening on your school boards, things that are happening in Florida, don't say gay, and things like that. So in the 2000s, a lot of progress is being made in places where progress can be being made, but then there's this sort of rising undercurrent that's like, we've gone so far in this direction that they're going to start pushing back against it. And that's going to happen in small, subtle ways, small changes in language, small changes in laws, until we reach the point of don't say gay. But, you know, these little sort of microaggressions have been happening in places like Florida for at least 20 years. So 2011, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I will tell you that I personally have worked on a few policies that allow veterans who have been discharged unfavorably under Don't Ask, Don't Tell to have their honorable discharge reinstated. The only reason they were dishonorably discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell was for being LGBTQ. They're eligible to apply to have that reversed, which is great because anybody who's a veteran knows there are benefits that are available to you that if you have been honorably discharged, you can take, but if you have been dishonorably discharged, you cannot take, right? So this is a big deal, and it really served to separate a huge part of the LGBTQ veteran population from the rest of the veteran population, further making the outcomes even worse than they already are for LGBTQ people and veterans. Let's see. Yeah, so in 2011, Don't Ask, Don't Tell ends, but again, we haven't gotten to a place where we can get to the rectifying that for another 10 years. I believe it was 2021 that we passed that in New Jersey, that the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs can assist dishonorably discharged veterans with getting their discharge reinstated. So it's taken a really long time to build equity in places where it's been systematically taken away, which is like the whole military system, I guess. Let's see. Man, this is really small. 2013, the repeal of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed into law by Bill Clinton in 1996, prohibited same-sex couples from receiving federal marriage benefits. This was a big deal too, the repeal of DOMA. And then I guess we have Obergefell. I think this ends there. 2015. Can we flip to the next slide? The one that's like the one I typed out. There we go. So this goes real quick, right? 2016, the ban on trans troops is lifted, and then in 2017, it's reinstated. And then in 2017, we see sort of the predecessor of where we're at right now with Don't Say Gay and curriculum things. Governor of Utah signs a bill repealing a law forbidding the discussion or promotion of advocating of homosexuality in schools. As soon as that happened, it came on the radar of evangelical and conservative organizations that now people were allowed to talk about homosexuality in schools. And so, you know, a pretty strong snapback happened. 2017, Tennessee Republican Governor Bill Haslam signs HB 1111, seen as an attempt to challenge Obergefell. And then in 2017, the reinstatement of the ban on trans troops. However, federal judge rules that that was not constitutional. In 2017, he tried to stop it again. In 2018, transgender identity is removed from the ICD-10. I guess we're on 10 now, the ICD-10. And instead, it's classified as a sexual health condition. Continues to enable healthcare systems to provide healthcare needs related to gender. 2019 in New Jersey. This is a point of personal pride. New Jersey has become the second state in the United States of America to require public schools to teach LGBTQ and disability-inclusive material. I want you to know that when people are protesting the inclusive curriculum law, they are not protesting the disability identity part. And this bill was signed into law with two pieces. It required disability identity and LGBTQ identity. And I have never heard anybody say that they did not want people to learn about disability inclusion. So that ought to tell you what they really mean about this law. A law allowing legal gender change without medical or psychological requirements, as well as third gender option X on birth certificates in New York City. And we also have this in New Jersey too, I believe beginning in 2022. Yep, 2020. In 2020, the DOH rolled back an Obama-era executive order which made it so transgender individuals protected from discrimination in healthcare. Rolling back of these protections is, again, one of these small microaggressions that happen sort of under the radar if nobody's watching. It's not an all-out assault. It's not a loud assault. It's a rolling back. It's like removing LGBTQ people from the official White House website. These little changes that indicate what direction we're moving in. Let's see. But then in 2020, the executive order came making the government recognize more protections on the basis of discrimination against sex, including sexuality, gender identity, and sex stereotype. And then also the executive order ending the ban on service by trans people in the military. I actually don't know any trans people that were affected by that ban. I don't know if it ever actually took effect to the point where they were excusing people from the military service based on their transgender identity. But it's a frightening tone to take, and it's a frightening thing for LGBTQ people to hear, right? Whether it happened or not, whether it was put into practice or not, that this is always on the table is really a very scary thing. So, where are we in my... All right, so that's, I think we kind of covered. There have been 450 bills introduced this legislative cycle all over the United States, 75 of which have passed, which specifically are designed to restrict the rights and identities of LGBTQ people in different ways on different levels. That's double the number of last year. So if this is the direction that we're moving in, it's up to states like New Jersey to further codify into their state statute these rights so that they're not up to what the national tone is, right? And so that's what we're doing here in New Jersey all the time. So if we can go to current proposed, yeah, there we go. That's good. So on my, and I'll read it out loud to you too. So on the bills that I track, there's like 50 bills, and not all of them are as exciting or interesting to talk about. Some of them are just like real little things that can make measures of equity for LGBTQ people, but overall not real exciting to talk about. These are three that I think are super important, that we ask our legislators to act on, to move, to let them know that we support. So we'll start with codifying trans student guidance. The Department of Education of the state of New Jersey issued trans student guidance about pronouns, about bathroom usage, about how we handle students' gender identity in school. Basically, the bottom line is that we are acting in the best interest of the student by not outing them to their parent, right? Because as we know, we talked about before, religious-based alienation, family-based alienation, it doesn't work out for kids when they're outed in a place where they didn't already feel comfortable telling their parents about it. If it was okay for them to tell you, if they thought it was okay for them to tell you, they would have told you. That's the bottom line. Outing never works for anyone. It's never good. So, codifying the trans student guidance into statute, it writes into statute the Department of Education's guidance, which is already on file and should be being followed. But what we're seeing right now on our school boards is this sort of gray area between what is guidance from the Department of Education and what school boards think they have to follow or don't have to follow. So that's why we've got 5 or 6 districts in New Jersey that are challenging the guidance and saying that they're going to write a policy that outs kids to their parents. And this is why our Attorney General is suing them. In Hanover, the bill is, their policy is on hold. There's an injunction before putting it into action because it's not constitutional, it's not sound, and they're not allowed to do it. But they're going to try it anyway, and they're going to try it all over the state. And they're going to try it in places where you don't think they're going to try it, places where LGBTQ people congregate, places that you would probably consider liberal or safe or inclusive or diverse, like South Orange, Maplewood. If there are any conservative members that get on a Board of Ed that really have this bent in their head that they're going to do this, they're going to push it and push it and push it. It's up to us to let them know that that's not how we want our kids to be treated. So that's an important one, A4109. The sponsors of this bill are Myla Jacey and Verlena Reynolds Jackson. Myla Jacey is a huge champion of LGBTQ rights in this state. Unfortunately, she is retiring from the legislature at the end of this session, which is somewhat detrimental to our representation and presence in legislative priorities. So we'll be contacting sponsors for bills like this that are not Myla Jacey and that may have to be educated and sold on things where some of our legislators already know these things. And they do their own research and they try to learn. It's going to be up to us to educate some of them. This next one, very important, A5499, S3907. This is the so-called book ban bill. And it makes it illegal to ban books in places of public accommodation, including public schools. And if the public school is banning books that are on the approved list of books that should be included in their library, it'll withhold public funding from them. And the hope is that if they're withholding public funding, that will cause an outcry from the parents who send their kids to these schools and expect them to have access to these materials. Also public libraries. So it's public libraries and public school libraries, which are also public libraries, right? Yes, Ma? You could ask me whatever this is at home. Go on.
So with the school curriculums,
Uh-huh.
what exactly is the verbiage that the parents object to? Because
So-
anywhere I go, like even when I'm getting my haircut,
Misinformation.
do you know what this, yes, I believe it's misinformation, so what does it really say? Because I think all of us have people that we come across that throw that at us, and unless we have all the facts, we may not know how to say that.
Sure. Okay, so the first thing to sort of make clear here is that there's a bunch of different things that they are coming at, right? There's inclusive curriculum, which is the inclusive curriculum disability law that was passed in 2019 by the legislature, by both houses of the legislature, by elected officials that you all voted for, they all voted for. These people are our voice in Trenton. They passed this bill to include inclusive curriculum includes LGBTQ people in things like word problems and historical figures, right? That doesn't discuss sexuality or sexual practice. It's just including the fact that like some people have 2 dads, some people have 2 moms, some people are born with girl parts and aren't a girl, and it's not sexually explicit. But this is the thing they're connecting to the Department of Health and Human Services phys ed and health standards, the DOE's phys ed and health standards, which include things like it's, again, not explicit, but it includes things like there are other things other than cis and hetero people in the world, right? And I know that you've heard wild things in the hair salon, go to a new hair salon, about how they're teaching anal sex to kindergartners. They are not doing that. That is not a thing. I mean, that's the thing that you see on Facebook, right? Or that's the thing. There is intentional misinformation and disinformation being passed in the form of like a PDF that they've gotten their hands on, and they will share it with other people, and it says those things. But no teacher wrote that lesson plan. The Department of Education did not put that out there as a resource, and it's spread like wildfire. So I think a big part of what we're talking about here is discerning, truth from intentional misinformation, which is sort of the area that we're existing here, the space that we're doing, trying to dispel these misconceptions and intentional spread of misinformation. So does it actually say that? No, it doesn't actually say that. It says, and the other thing is, when they talk about parental choice, is that you've always had the opportunity to go to a school board meeting or to speak with your child's teacher or to see the lesson plans online. This is not new. You know, you can always ask for these things. Nobody is taking those choices away from a parent who wants to know what's happening in the school. Nobody is saying that we're going to teach your kid this and it's a secret society that you can't be involved in. Like, that's never happened. It's a sort of hysteria that's sort of transformed into something else. And to be fair, for those that would be anti-LGBTQ and want to push this misinformation, to their credit, they've been very effective at it. They've ran a great campaign of misinformation and disinformation that preys on people's sort of fears and lack of understanding. Go on.
And follow up on that, I said, as a retired high school teacher, going to school board meetings, at one end, I'm glad that school boards are starting to recognize they need to do more. And the fact that there are actually banned books out there appall me. But I guess my biggest concern as a teacher and having experienced it myself is the child themselves. And you were saying that misinformation is out there on social media. But what is being done to let them know where to go to get the right information and the help they need when they need it? Because they're 14 to 18-year-olds don't go to their parents and they don't know where to go then to talk to somebody.
And oftentimes it is the teacher that is the only one hearing these things. Look, you're a great teacher if your student tells you, look, I don't feel comfortable anywhere else in the world except for in your classroom. That's a really remarkable thing. So the NJEA has opened up what they call the Center for Honesty in Education. So the NJEA provides these resources to the teachers, right? And I think that I will tell you again, those who are inclined to spread misinformation, disinformation, got the jump on people who are operating in good faith. So I think, and we've been a little bit behind the 8 ball, I think, because I don't assume that anybody is going to be as nefarious as to spread intentional disinformation about what's happening in public schools. That is not how most of us believe that the world operates or want to believe that the world operates, especially if you're here in this room. I believe in our public school education system. I think probably most of you do too. And I think it's also important to realize what the goal of many of these things are. When you put distrust in a school board meeting, when you put distrust and villainize public school teachers, what you're looking for is resegregation. And I hope that everybody realizes that too. If it's just a light bulb going off in your head right now, why would you put mistrust and distrust in your public school system? What do you want out of that? What they're looking for is to resegregate schools and take public funds for private schooling. School choice is the nice way to say it. It was a light bulb for me 5-7 years ago in my head. Why would they say these things? What is the end game here? What would they like to see out of it? They would like to see your public school dollars send their child to a private school where everybody is white, or everybody is straight, or everybody is Christian, or everybody is of a certain socioeconomic level. Yeah, it's a hard thing to realize, especially like when you're a product of the public school system and it has done very well by you. It's a weird realization to come to, but this is where we're going. This is where they're looking for us to go. The NJEA has an excellent resource. It's the Center for Education and it's Honesty in Education. But for the kids, we're lucky to see a bunch of organizations working to support them from that end too. GLSEN is incredible. PFLAG is incredible. Support groups for kids, resources for kids, confidential resources for kids. But again, this is also a little bit, so like that would depend on the kid having access to the internet or having a phone, right? Not every kid has that. I feel particularly and especially for kids in rural areas or areas where these resources are not readily available. And I'll tell you that South Jersey is one of those places that's sort of a desert for these kind of resources. So we're working on that all the time too.
I guess we're lucky in this state. We do have a very strong teachers union, NJA, very aggressive, very proactive, but it's not necessarily in other states. My son's a teacher in Pennsylvania, and he runs up against those problems as well in this day and age.
And it's an unfortunate thing that even something like the teachers union has become so heavily politicized, right? So that there really seems to be no middle ground. It's either like you're all the way in on these politics or you're not. And I think that that's also at the detriment of students, but I am grateful for what the teachers unions do. It's also no surprise that New Jersey is consistently ranked #1 in public school education and outcomes for its students in the entire country. It's either 1, 2, or 3 every single year. It's not a mistake. It's not a coincidence. And when people are when people are trying to walk that back, walk the progress back, you have to ask yourself why. What would be the point behind that? That's the only point that I would see. So the last bill that I think is interesting, and it might not be interesting to other people who are not in this stuff all the time, but this is where real change is made, right? This is where real change on an individual level is made. If you're removing the $50 fee associated with some name change processing, you're helping out people who really need that $50 in their pocket and really need to not spend it on getting a document change that it's already legal to change. I have a couple lawyer friends who do things like name change processing paperwork, and one of them sent me a text the other day and said, "What are you guys doing about this bill? Is this on your radar?" I said, "Yes, we have a meeting about it next week." She said, "Because as I send out another $50 check that my client had to borrow money to get their name changed." So this is a big deal. This is going to be a big deal for some people because paperwork matching your identity, if it doesn't, is a barrier to a lot of things for a lot of people, right? It's a barrier to driving, to getting a job, to getting your records released as far as your diploma, your incarceration records. These things need to match because otherwise you have big problems every step of the way. Voting. So $50 is a lot of money to some people. Sometimes it's a lot of money to me. And there's no reason that we should be charging it. So yeah, so that one I find, I like that bill. I think it's a big deal to people who are worried about this kind of thing, worried about their paperwork not matching. They want to apply for a job, they want to get on with their lives, and they're sort of still stuck behind a $50 fee that's preventing them from getting there. It's ridiculous. So in a progressive state like New Jersey, if we can't do something like that for the people who need it, what good are we doing? Can we go to the next slide? The one that's very upsetting to me. Proposed legislation that is anti-LGBTQ. So we talked before about, I guess it wasn't that interesting. Bye, bud. That's my husband. It's okay, I could say it. We talked before about the process of bills being passed, right? So these two bills are not going anywhere based on the current construction and composition of our legislature. But these bills are being introduced everywhere, and it's the same group of people with the exact same wording that introduced this bill in every state. They find a sponsor in legislature that is sort of aligned with their values, and they push the exact same language at them. They say, look, this bill was passed in this state and this state. Let's introduce it in New Jersey. It's not going to go anywhere in New Jersey, but it's here. So the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, in my head, I always think, when did you guys care about fairness in women's sports before it involved transgender people? If we're going to talk about fairness in women's sports, what about why people in the WNBA make a ton less money than people in the, like, that's ridiculous. Let's call it what it is. It prohibits trans students from participating in the sport category matching their gender identity. There's a lot of misinformation about this too, right? And there's a lot of people getting on the radio or on a talk show and talking about, you know, I'm okay with LGBTQ people, but that's where I draw the line. These are people who know nothing about transgender people. These are people who say these things, they know nothing about kids participating in sports, and they know nothing about transgender people. And the information is all readily available. It is a willful stubbornness to not learn it when they keep repeating these points and this misinformation.
Where would you find it? 'Cause that's what I heard in my hair salon.
You guys need to go to different hair salons, okay?
No, I disagree. I think you go where you
Right, I agree.
try to educate. I would like to know where.
So I can provide that to you too.
First, I will tell you, Melissa was quite a genius with her there's a lot to it that you don't know. Now, the next time I saw her, she wasn't, I think she must have done her own homework.
And I mean, but what should that tell you about how much of a hot button issue is that the first time you sat down in this woman's chair, she wants to talk about the genitals of kids participating in sports? Let's be honest.
Very talented.
It's weird. To me, that's a very weird thing to focus on.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I never had thought of that. I thought, well, gee, I could imagine, these young women and they're competing against somebody who hasn't had the medicine or whatever like
Right.
that. I mean, I was like, it didn't make logical sense. So I would like to know.
So there are a ton of resources about it. This is also like, every kid is different. Every kid does or does not transition different, has whatever resources are available, has whatever agreement and understanding they have with their doctor, with their parent. So a broad ban on assigned male at birth people competing in sports that match their gender identity is a really regressive and thing that we should be really wary of codifying into law. So, and I have I have a few friends. Look, I have friends who didn't want to be activists, right? But their kid is trans. They have no other choice. I have friends who did not grow up progressive or liberal or open to these sort of things, and they have had to learn how to make the world better for their kid and advocate for their kid. And those are the people I'm going to listen to and trust. The people who have real life experience and the people who have a vested interest and are stockholders in this issue. I'm not going to listen to some, pardon, dummy in the hair salon with opinions and not actual lived experience or facts. So I will provide for you some resources where we can do some more learning about that and why sort of every situation is different and a broad ban is really regressive. And then S2648 does not have a companion bill. It's only been introduced in the Senate and it is not going to go anywhere, but this is so-called parental rights. And what we also need to be a little bit aware of is the sort of dog whistle codified language that's being used here. When we say things like parental rights, your first thought is, how could that be a bad thing? Parents take care of their kids, right? Not every parent takes care of their kid in the way that you take care of your kid, and not every parent is accepting, loving, open, understanding, honest. So this basically allows parents to dictate what the school is teaching. Parents have always had the right to opt their child out of any part of curriculum. So this is, again, a hysteria created out of nothing. Parents have always had the right to opt their kid out of sex ed if it's against your religious beliefs, that your kid learns about sex before they're 16. You've always had that right. It's not ever been restricted or taken from you. This prohibits school districts from incorporating instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity for students in grades kindergarten through 6 and requires consent from parents or guardians for students in grades 7 through 12 for instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity. And what I want you to know about this is that you've always received instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity since the second you had sex education in whatever grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, when women learn about menstruation and things like that. You've always had instruction on these things, but you've always had instruction on cisgender and heterosexual sexuality and gender identity. We've always had these things, and this bill doesn't ask for them not to have instruction on those things. It just asks for them not to let kids know that gay people also have sex or that something exists outside of a gender binary that is ascribed. So again, it's pretty clear what the aim here is, and the aim is not to protect children. It's to keep children from knowing about the richness and diversity of humanity. That's all. It's not actually about protecting kids, because I don't see any laws introduced about gun violence or, and the same people who introduce these bills are opposing gun control. So when we talk about what's really good for kids and what's about protecting kids, I see it differently. I don't think these bills are about protecting kids from anything. All right. So, could we go to the next? There we go. So what I would say is, if we're talking about what is the most effective way to make sure that we are carrying through with LGBTQ equity, and if we're intentionally inclusive and diverse, I would say that staying informed and up to date on actions, resolutions, and votes happening at your local township, council, and school board meetings is the biggest part of being involved and knowing what's happening. And it might be happening here. There are several towns where, like, the kids in the town asked the township committee, could you raise a pride flag? And the township committee said, we're not going to do that. We only raise the American flag here. Okay. But then if you sort of pay attention and you watch, well then, but that's not true, because then there's Portuguese Day flag, and then there's, you know, flags for other veterans and things like that, which should also be recognized. But if they tell you that they only raise the American flag, and that's why they can't raise a pride flag to let the kids know that they're loved and included and accepted, you should be pretty wary of that. And that's not something that's publicized. You have to look at your agenda for your township meetings to know what's on the agenda, and you have to listen to public comment to see what people are asking for from the audience and how it's being responded to. And I would just say that staying active and staying attentive is really the best way to combat misinformation. I would say show up in numbers to support LGBTQ students, inclusive curriculum, and other DEI measures. It's happening in Monmouth County in 4 different districts on the same night, which is also intentional. If you don't think that it's a coordinated effort, that should be enough to tell you that they are trying to split the vote here, that they are trying to split the effort and attention. So there are large groups of people who are minded in the same way that I am, that we shouldn't be banning books and we shouldn't be outing kids to their parents. And they have scheduled all of these meetings on the same night so that instead of getting 100 people at one meeting, they'll get 20 at each meeting opposing what they're doing. It is a coordinated effort and requires to be met with the same coordinated effort. I would say you need to speak up when you hear people sharing false, hateful, or intentionally misleading information. I'll tell you, my mom likes this, I bet. The other day there were people working underneath our window on, like, the sewer line or the gas line. They were looking for the gas line. And I heard one of them saying one of these sort of intentionally misleading and untruthful things to the other one. And I guess they didn't realize anybody was listening. They didn't realize anybody was home. I work from home. I had the window open. I just leaned out the window. I said, let me stop you right there. And you have to. I mean, you have to, because maybe this guy went home and did a Google for himself and learned real facts. Maybe he was just passing along something that somebody else told him that fit their narrative. But if we're upstanders, if we're committed to doing the work of being allies to the Jewish community, to the Black community, to the LGBTQ community, to disability communities, if we're committed to the work, it's not just, it doesn't take a vacation, right? It doesn't take a vacation. So I'm just sitting in my office doing my little job at the computer, and I'm like, gosh, I got to do this right now, stand up and tell this guy he's wrong in the middle of my workday. Yes, I have to do that if I'm committed to it, if I'm living it. Practice intentional inclusion and getting uncomfortable. A lot of these conversations are difficult, especially with people who do not agree with you. And it's weird, and sometimes it leads to you leaving people behind when you move forward. Sometimes it leads to an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner at your family table, or a weird look in the supermarket. But look, it's my belief that, again, it doesn't take a vacation, and it's not something that I can personally ignore. So I hope you would join me in that when you hear it and see it. And if you need more information and messaging, we have toolkits, we have one-pagers, we have flyers you could put on the table at your community center or at your church, or, you know, if you want Garden State Equality to ever come in to talk to your employer or your DEI group at work. There are people who are better at that stuff than I am. I'm not real great in a corporate setting. Yeah, so we have all the information, and if we don't have it, we have a connection for somebody that will be able to provide it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
It's not so much a question as a comment.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you came.
Thank you.
I stuck your toe in this religious institution.
This doesn't, this doesn't feel like a religious institution to me,
We are. And I would recommend to you that you check out for the Presbyterians, the more light churches. They'll all have a regional coordinator. For the United Methodists, it's the Reconciling Ministries. And for the United Church of Christ, it's the Welcoming Congregation. They're all LGBTQIA friendly, and they'd love to hear you, and their people vote. And they welcome you. And yeah, this is a desert down at this end of New Jersey, but there are reconciling Methodists in the South, the deep South. So they'll help you get a toe in the door. And the second thing is to remember that the evangelical fundamentalist far-right people are a minority.
Yep.
And in my denomination, which is United Methodist, we're finishing up General Conference. And we have literally said, okay, nationwide, we're going to lose 13 to 16% of our churches. And you go, oh my God, what are we going to do? We have 84% of our churches left. And you need to hear that people are not walking away from this issue. And we split over gay rights.
So,
some of the churches that left because we were not inclusive enough.
oh,
And they'll be coming back when we finally get our legislation in line.
so I mean, I love that they are a minority, but what I will tell you, the counterpoint to that is that they have money. So you can be a minority, but if you were the more vocal than the majority, and you have the funding to push to lobby legislators, if you have the funding to push messaging, you've got probably most queer organizations beat, and most organizations full of people who are just normal workaday people who really believe in the message of DEI. That's where they have us beat. They have organized well, and they have fundraised like crazy from very rich donors.
And we have money too. And people haven't asked for it. And people haven't come to
Interesting.
us.
Writing that down.
It's true that those churches have a big megaphone right now. But shame on the journalistic community
Absolutely.
that equates Christianity with far-right evangelical fundamentalists. They are a minor part and a very recent part, less than 100 years. And educate the journalists too.
Yeah.
But come to us, come to our sister congregations, we vote,
Cool.
and we'll give you money.
Cool. So, and I think it's also important that you guys living down here, I think it's important that Assemblyman Guardian hears from you, right? So he is a gay man, he is a Republican, he is far less conservative than many of his counterparts on the floor of the Assembly, and I think that it's important from him to hear from you guys to know that he does not, that he can be who he is and he can vote the way he wants to vote and still have support of the voters. I think that sometimes we fall into this really polarizing partisanship where, you know, if you're a Republican, you feel like you have to vote this way. If you're a Democrat, you feel like you have to vote this way. I think it would be important for your legislators to know that you're here, because I'm not sure that they are aware of that. And also, you know who your congressman is. He was a Democrat and now he's a Republican, and he has made some real weird decisions when he was a state legislator in the state, on the floor, he voted against marriage equality, and then he gets to Congress as a Republican and he votes for marriage equality. I'm not real sure where his head is at all the time, but what I do know is that it's important for him to know that he represents you, and you are not on board with all, maybe you're not on board with all the things that I'm saying, but you're not on board with all the things that he's saying when he holds forums. Again, I have never heard the man care about protecting kids until it became a hot button issue, but he holds these forums on this and these panel discussions. It's important for him to hear both sides, and to not just let the loudest voices be the rightest voices, because they're not always the rightest voices. So that's what I would ask of you, is just stay vigilant and speak up. And these are the people who are making decisions and voting on your behalf. And I hope they know what your values are and what you feel in your heart. Anybody, anything?
No, I just to let you know, the Trevor Project,
Yeah.
we do contribute to the Trevor Project here with our church.
Cool. And also, I forgot to put on there, the Center for Honesty and Education from NJEA for anybody who wants to learn more about what the teachers' unions doing to support the teachers who believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, protecting the identities of the kids who need them the most. Hold on. And, the other thing is, you can use the website to find your legislator and let them know how you feel, but you don't get their email address. This is a pro tip, right? If you want to write to Assemblyman Guardian, his email address is asmguardian@njledge.org. It's really not published anywhere, but Assemblywomen, ASW, last name, all one word, @njledge.org. All your senators, regardless of their gender identity, are SEN, S-E-N, last name, all one word together, @njledge.org. Makes it a lot easier. You can send it to other people. You can tell them to write them. You can write them 50 times in a row if you know their email address. And that's just a thing that's not published on the website. Anybody, anything?
Very interesting, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. It was a wealth of information, and thank you very much for your call to action.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, very much so. And for the resources and so forth, Brenda and I have the PDF and also the
Yeah.
PowerPoint if you're interested.
Yep.
We'll mail out to anyone who would like to have those resources.
And also, my email address is on there. Please send me an email at any time if we can provide a speaker to you, or if you need any information, or if you'd like to be connected with local actions that are happening to attend school board meetings and things, please send me an email.
And we plan on continuing our relationship with